Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Empowered by Victress podcast. I am your host, Stacy Orsborn, and today I have Dr. Mariah Bullock on. Mariah and I go back here in the last couple years, have worked together in a couple different ways. And she is a extremely influential woman in the women's fitness space, and women athletics and women's mental health and everything in between. Currently running her private practice out in Utah. So thank you, Mariah, for joining us.
Hey, Stacy. Thank you so much. Happy to chat.
Yes, yes. So now you went to college at UNL, is that right?
No, I actually went to college at Stanford University for
That's
undergrad, and then I went to BYU for grad school, but I worked at UNL in their sports psychology department. Yep,
that's right. That's right. So Stanford, I'm sorry, not even close to UNL.
no worries.
Not even close.
We're both
Like how
good.
do I get there? I can't get there. Um, How did you know Emma from our gym, though? For those of you that don't know, Emma is one of our young athlete coaches and one of our coaches in the gym, and has pretty big ties to the community. And Ray and her played soccer together, I believe, right?
Yeah, Em and I played soccer together. I'm trying to remember like what team we were playing with. But I think that we played there's a program called ODP, which is the Olympic Development Program, which is a youth development. It kind of feeds into the national team. And so they have it at a state level, regional level, and then eventually national team. And so I'm pretty sure that that's where we played together.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a long time ago,
yeah,
but it was really cool to
a
see
long
her.
time ago. Yeah, yeah, yeah. See her in Victress that one day. So Maria, tell us a little bit about your background. I know obviously you are currently working as a sports psychologist, correct? Did I say that correctly?
Yep, that's correct.
Yep. And then you played not only high school collegiate sports, but also professional sport briefly. So just tell us a little bit about your background in regards to maybe athletics to start, and then we'll go down the professional route afterwards.
For sure. So I just love sports in general. I just grew up being that tomboy kid playing in the streets and in backyards, doing whatever sport I could. Um, and I think what I really enjoyed about my development and upbringing as an athlete is that my parents allowed me to play lots of different sports. I didn't specialize super early. So I was like literally anything I could get my hands on. But in high school, I played soccer, softball, and volleyball. And I played club soccer and softball. So those were the sports that I took a little bit more seriously and competitively, and was considering both of them and in college and maybe playing both, but then decided I really wanted to just focus on one. So I decided on soccer, got recruited to Stanford, played there. Our team was really successful. If you're familiar with women's soccer, my freshman year, Kelly O'Hara was on our team, who was a member of the US national team, Ali Riley, who was a member of the New Zealand
Mhm.
national team. Kristen Press, who was on the US team, was also there when I was there. So just a really, really talented group. We went to 4 Final Fours while I was there, 3 championship matches, and then one national championship. So it was a ton of fun. I loved my experience. I loved the girls. I loved the school. Like all good things to say about that. Then
Let me
yes,
cut you off. What position did you play in college? And
yeah. So I was a defensive center mid.
okay, so that means you're like in
Yes.
the middle of the field playing defense mostly?
Yeah, you got it. So, okay, so we have our back line, we have our midfielders, we have our forwards. And then within the midfield, you can be like wider on the field or like more central. So I was more central within like that midfield line. I'm being like nitpicky and calling myself a defensive midfielder in that I would like hold back a little bit from the attack and kind of sit in front of the defenders.
Okay. 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 So you're like the backup, but like still running an incredibly like large amount.
Yeah, it was way more than I would ever. I think it gives off the perception that we enjoy running, but I absolutely hate it. It's just you don't think about it and you're having fun when you're chasing a ball and a person. So, yeah,
That
I
is
think
so
that,
funny because you are not the first soccer player that I have talked to that has said that. Like
yeah,
all of the soccer players that I know well,
Uh-huh.
would say that they hate running, which is it's so funny. We went to a Casey Current game
Awesome.
as a team just a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
and uh, I guess it was probably a month ago. And I tried to strategically sit next to like the soccer player in our group so that I could like ask more questions because it is a sport that like I know a decent amount, but then like I don't know enough to be dangerous, that's for sure. And I love sports. I love all sports. I just like to like understand what's going on. And
Totally.
I said something about the goalie and she was like, "Well, it's a goalkeeper." I'm like, "Oh, there's a difference? There's a difference between a goalie and a goalkeeper." Okay. My bad.
Yeah, it's semantics, but yeah, sure. If you want to be specific.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's this like magic amount of time that all of a sudden comes back on the clock. Like you think the game, like
Yeah.
you're like nervous and you think the game's over, but it's not over because there's
Yeah.
this like why don't they have timeouts? Like that is a question that I have for you. Like why isn't there timeouts in soccer?
I don't have an answer to that. There's a lot of rules that I would change. Extra time being one of them. Just pause the clock. Like it just makes it
Right.
easier. Why do we like count the way that we count the time is weird. There's a lot of things. And in order, I think the way that we've gotten around timeouts, and maybe you don't know this as like a casual observer, but people will do strategic injuries.
Oh
So
yes, they do this in baseball. They do this in baseball too.
yeah, they'll be like, "Oh, I'm down. I need medical attention," just to provide the opportunity for the players to go over
Mm.
to the sideline, get water, and get some like tactical information from the coach.
And then I learned if it's at least 87 degrees, you get water.
Oh yeah, there's a water break. Yep, uh-huh.
Yeah, but there's more time still from the
Yes.
water break.
Yes, but you don't know how much time until they tell you at the end.
I was like, stay tuned. because then because then even in the more time, if you take more time, you have to add more time.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. It is quite the sport. I was very much intrigued by all of the things and within the sport. So that was my like little brief. My kids played obviously when they were younger, but it was not structured that way in any way, shape, or form. So anyway, you had your soccer experience at Stanford.
Yeah.
And that led you on to bigger, better things.
Yeah. So the year, let's see, it would have been 2013. Yes. Yes. So 2013 was the first year that the National Women's Soccer League, or NWSL, was created, and that was the year that I graduated. So I got drafted to the Boston Breakers and played there for a year, and then I got traded to the Seattle Reign, played there for 2 years. Um, there's a regular season championship, so whichever team has the best record at the end of regular season gets something called the NWSL Shield. So that's we won that the 2 years that I was there. And then there's a separate like playoff, and that's where you can win like the championship. And so we went to the final and lost in both of those. So I have a lot of
Oops.
second places.
I wasn't going to say anything. I just wasn't. Okay, so I'm trying to think who we played. I feel like it was somebody from Seattle that we played, the current played. Would that be
Hmm.
the same league or would that be
Yeah, it's the same league.
really? So the Trinity Rodman, whatever her name
Is
is.
on Washington Spirit.
Okay, that's who we played.
Hmm.
Really,
Yeah,
I was just
Washington.
excited.
No.
Yeah, yeah, same thing ish. Uh, um, no, it's a fascinating sport. I mean, just the tenacity and the athleticism and the grit involved in this type of sport is just absolutely like phenomenal. So I commend any and all. I think our marketing director, she was a goalkeeper
Nice.
and see, I said that right.
Yes, you
And
did.
I'm pretty sure she said she has broken every single one of her fingers, which
Hmm.
is beyond fascinating to me, but I'm sure that's common. So that's fine. Um, so what led you down the career path of like sports psychology specific? Were you working on your master's while you were doing professional sports, or like how did all of that come to be?
Yeah, so at Stanford, I didn't really know what I wanted to major in going in. And so I was just getting my general ed courses taken care of. And along the way, I took a couple psychology classes and I was like, oh, this is super interesting. I really like this. So I decided that I would major in psychology. So then next step is cool, I'm majoring in psychology. This is cool. Do I actually want to do anything with it as a career? So in my very last, we're on the quarter system. So in my very last quarter, I take this class that's called Intro to Counseling, and it's to train you to be a peer counselor at Stanford because there's like a peer counseling center there, which is pretty cool. And I just absolutely loved it. It like really clicked for me. I was like, this is cool. I get to sit down and I get to chat with people, and it feels like we're just having a conversation, but I'm also maybe helping them. That sounds nice. And I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I was decent at it and I did well in the class. So I was like, nice, let's maybe pursue this. So from that point, I started talking to mentors in the psychology space more broadly. And at the time, so again, this was 2013, there weren't a ton of sports psychology jobs. There wasn't
Mm-hmm.
sports psychology at Stanford for me. There wasn't sports psychology professionally in the league at the time. So I hadn't had exposure to sports psychology. So everyone I spoke to, even in the sports space, was kind of like pursue a degree in just clinical or counseling psychology, but more mental health. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, no problem. So I knew going into my professional career that this is what I want. Psychology was something that
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do after I was done playing. So that's kind of how I decided on that. In terms of sports psychology, that was also kind of a roundabout. So I get into BYU, I go, and I think initially I want to be working with teens and youth because I just love that age group. It's a lot of fun for me. And so I start in clinical mental health. My degree was, yeah, a PhD in clinical psychology. And I'm working with kids, and I'm like, this is not it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I get connected with a sports psychologist at BYU, and I do what's called the practicum, which is that I'm just supervised and trained by that professor, and get to start seeing some student athletes under their supervision. So then I started doing that, and that was my next kind of like click moment of like, wow, this feels so much better. I can relate to these people because I've been through it. I can bring in my experience as an athlete and I can still be helping them from a mental health perspective. And that's when I started getting into the training on the mental performance side. So I'm going to assume that most of the people who are listening, and maybe you, don't actually understand the distinction between like clinical psychology and sports psychology. So I will go ahead and describe that.
I would say for me, like my only experience or like I would say assumption
Yeah.
is like it's more performance based versus just like the everyday like living your life. That's my guess,
Mhm.
but I'm not completely positive on that.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we have the clinical side, and that's more, like I said, mental health related. So this could be depression, anxiety, substance use, eating disorders, trauma. That's all on
Mm-hmm.
this end of the spectrum. We get kind of towards the middle, and this is stuff that either a clinical psychologist or a sports psychologist or mental performance coach could be working on with you. And that's stuff like sleep or adjusting to a new team, or maybe you're playing abroad and adjusting to a new country. It could be leadership and communication and relationships. That's all kind of the stuff in the middle. That's not necessarily a disorder, but is also not like sport specific
Right.
performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we get into the mental performance space, and this is anything that can give you kind of that additional edge in your performance. When we talk about the mental game, things like that, we're looking at motivation, confidence, like handling pressure, anxiety that you feel before competition, goal setting, all of that kind of stuff. So that's the mental performance space. So I do the broad spectrum of both, which is really nice for me because I like the variety.
Well, and I would think, I mean, especially the younger the person, probably if they haven't ever done any kind of like other like clinical psychology, so dealing with childhood trauma or dealing with, anxiety, depression, like whatever it be, like I don't think he would care. Like my son, for example, like is definitely like probably someone that would benefit. Like I have been in like clinical setting psychology on and off all my life, but I would imagine it bleeds over into performance at times, right? Like it's kind of like what's the deepest layer, maybe a little bit. Do you
Totally.
see that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think two things. Sometimes people will come in to me because they come presenting with, well, I want to get better. I'm having a hard time. Like I'm training really
Hmm.
well, but it's not showing up in competition.
Hmm.
And we get into it because it feels more approachable, right? Like, oh yeah, like it's my performance. I want to get better. But then we dig a little bit and there's so much more underneath, like you said, like there's so much deeper. Um, Someone who is an anxious person, 100% that's going to show up in how they play. They're going to feel anxiety in everything that they do. If it's a more like generalized anxiety or social anxiety, if someone is feeling more depressed, then they're probably going to struggle with their confidence and their self-concept. And so sometimes it's just performance, but I find that most of the time there's probably something underneath that has more of a mental health component, and it can be hard to kind of separate the two.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Have you worked with mostly women over the years, or has it been kind of all over the spectrum, or what has that experience been for you professionally? I know we'll get into like who you've actually worked with more specifically, but like demographic wise, what does that look like for you?
I would say mostly women.
Hmm.
At UNL, I was working with male athletes, student athletes. In my private practice, primarily women, which I don't think that I anticipated going into the profession. But
Hmm.
as I was doing it, I was like, oh, this is where I'm like super passionate. I don't know. I think, again, like growing up, I was like a dude's girl. And I've grown into a girl's girl. Like I really love just working with and being around and empowering women. It's like, yeah, really developed. And I think it also comes from an equity standpoint. If you look at professional women's sports, it's just behind in a lot of ways. And so feeling like I can help provide resources that they deserve, and to help them to perform at their best and be seen on that level is also a passion.
Yeah, no, I mean, women's sports, I think, are slowly starting to have their moment a little bit
Totally.
more and more. And the psychological aspect, I think, is just so fascinating to me. Like I obviously like am very well versed in like human anatomy and like the physiology and like the muscles and like all those types of things, but the mental component of what even I do is
Yeah.
so significant. And the space that we hold and the preconceived notions and the self-talk and the ruminating self-talk, even if you're not an athlete per
Yes.
se,
Mhm.
anytime you're walking into a gym or you're following a training program or you're doing something, like there is that certain level of athleticism and performance and like the
Totally.
expectations for yourself or the other people are holding you to that um looks and feels like a duck, so it's probably a duck. Like it's, you're probably an athlete. And the psychological component, I just think, is absolutely something that a lot of women um, aren't aware of. I mean, I know in our space, within training women, I call the light like often, like, what are you telling yourself right now? Like in a group, like if something's hard, if something's
Yeah,
challenging, like what is your internal clock saying, or
totally.
talk saying, I should say, because that's your reality. Like that's what you're going to believe. We talk a lot about like, within the love language space, like if you're somebody that relates to like words of affirmation and you're internally like beating yourself up over and over and over again, like we're
Mhm.
not doing a whole lot of good. Like I'm not a mental health professional. I can't tell you where that's coming from, why it's happening, or any of those things, but like giving voice to those reframes. And so many women within our space are like, yes, I'm physically stronger, but the mental space is what's changed the most. Like the way I think about myself, the way I see myself. And that transition that I think physical movement allows us to like experience mentally
Yeah.
is just really transformative. And I'm sure you see that pretty frequently, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. There was like so many things that you were saying that I'm like, oh yes, this and this and this and this. But yeah, I mean, the first thing is that we talk to ourselves more than we talk to anyone else, right? And so building
Mhm.
that relationship and that dialogue with yourself is so important. And I think, like you asked me, like, oh, sports psychologist, is that the right name? And I'm like, yes,
Mhm.
but also no. Like, there's so many different names for what we do. but I think we could also be considered like performance coaches,
Hmm.
which then I think takes it away from you need to be an athlete to benefit from this, right? Like you said, we all are performing in some type of way, like
Hmm.
you have whether you're a stay-at-home mom, but you're coming into the gym, or you have a desk job, or you're an executive, you're running a company, whatever it is, there's something from performance psychology or sports psychology that can help you show up better. So, right, yeah,
Hmm.
like you're going into a lift, if it's about expectations, it's about goals, it's about your self-talk, it's about resilience when it gets really hard, like are you going to give up? Are you going to keep going when you fail at something? How are you going to interpret that? Like there's so much about sports psychology that can apply to like literally anyone.
How much of what you, with your demographic, because I mean, like, maybe we should talk about this first. Like, you've worked with Olympians, like this, right? Like, these are like top level athletes, top of their game that are at this high standard of performance. How much of your conversations with them is almost like, not, I don't want to say holding them back, but getting them to like come back down to like a healthy level of expectation for themselves, or like a healthy balance of, because we have, even in the gym, like we have the really high performers and maybe what we would consider potentially over exercisers, and
Yeah.
then we have the people that like need that, like, okay, like where's your resiliency, where's your grit, where's that little like dig a little deeper for me. So how much of that in those higher level athletes are you seeing? I'm sure you're not probably seeing that as much, or lack of grit as much, but
Mhm.
how much of that is like just trying to rein them in a little bit, or
Totally. So what I would say is that when I'm working with elite athletes, like some of the Olympians, in order for them to have gotten where they've gotten, they're high achievers, right? And so I think that there's kind of this subcategory or sub persona that's like this high achieving perfectionist, and that's what I
Mhm,
see a lot of. So it is, I've excelled my whole life and I've been praised for excelling and being successful. And so there's either I haven't really hit failure, or I'm worried that if I do fail or make a mistake, or I'm not this perfect person, that I'm going to lose everything that I've worked for,
mhm,
or people won't accept me, or whatever it is. And so it's a lot of, yes, can we have expectations that are realistic and that push us? We don't want to just lower expectations just for the sake of it. But I do feel like sometimes they expect their best performance every single time, or they expect like a linear growth path, and that's just not how it works, right?
mhm.
And so helping them shift a little bit to, can we be a little bit more realistic but still push ourselves? And then kind of paired with that, it's a lot of self-compassion, because I think that especially elite athletes and this kind of perfectionistic type is so self-critical when they make mistakes, and that it feels like we need to be self-critical in order to grow and to like learn and
Mhm.
get better. But it really just leaves us feeling, can we, I don't know if we can curse on this, but like feeling really crappy.
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. I know.
It leaves them feeling
Yeah.
really good about themselves if it's not that perfect level every single time. And they talk to them, kind of, we've talked about this, right? Like they talk to themselves way meaner than they would
Mm-hmm.
to anyone else, or that anyone would say to them.
Hmm. And then what about as their, I mean, maybe their sense of identity, right? Like how many of them identify their value,
Mhm,
their self-worth,
mhm,
their place in this world
mhm.
based on their ability to perform or to be identified as I am this that does this,
Mhm.
versus finding that self
Yes,
identity.
totally. Absolutely. That's a huge one. I think at every level, again, because it's been the biggest part of their life for so long. And it's the thing that they've been rewarded for and that people give them attention for. Right. And
Hmm.
I think now it's become more common language for people to be like more than an athlete, but I think it's still at the level of like it's a word, it's a phrase. And
Right.
if you really dig in, that they don't know what that means, or they're not practicing it. And I think there's a worry that, well, if I invest in other parts of my life, that's going to take away from my ability to perform. And so, yeah, it is a lot of work about like what are those other identities that are important to you, and how can we maybe disconnect from the athlete identity when we don't need to be in it right? Like, cool, if you're on the
Hmm.
field, court, pool, whatever, yes, we're on. But then when you're off, unless you're, if I guess like if you're doing recovery or treatment or something, sure. But then can we be a friend? Can we be someone who enjoys concerts? Can we be a family member? You know what I mean? Or
Hmm.
like spirituality, if that's what you're into, like your hobbies, all of that, so that if you're not performing well or if you get injured and that's taken away, that you're not just a shell of a human, you have these other things. And I like to work a lot with people about values and how that brings worth. And so it's like, sure, maybe I'm hurt and I can't be playing, but I can still be a hardworking person. I can still be a loyal and a respectful person. And at the end of the day, like that's what makes me a good human or worthwhile,
Right.
like full life.
Well, and how much of that, how much do you do with like leaving the sport or like,
Mhm.
or do you see that a lot within, like, okay, like, you know, for the most part, professional sports only last for so long for due to human body and probably psychological impact of like
Mhm.
performing at a high level for so long.
Yeah,
So when if they haven't done a good job of like maybe starting to like find those values and find those other outlets and like find
yeah.
like what do I want to do with my life when this
Mhm.
is over?
Totally.
I'm sure you have to support a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think that I saw this mostly in the collegiate space because the
Mm,
majority of college athletes are not going to be professional athletes, right? And
sure,
so
sure.
it might be some who have to medically retire. It might be some who were playing their sport. I don't want to say for the wrong reasons, but like we're playing their sport not because they loved it and enjoyed it and felt like they were growing, but because they felt like they had to, or for the status, or to like make their parents happy, or for the scholarship. And
Or the
so
money now.
yeah, right. And so it was a lot of work on like, why are you doing this? Like, what is your purpose right now? Do you still want to be doing it? And I'd say there's a good chunk of people that were like, you know what, I actually don't. Like, this is taking more than it's giving, and it's no longer serving the purpose that it used to. So I may be ready to move on. For some athletes who maybe it was a more natural ending after their senior year, then yeah, their sophomore, junior, senior year, we're talking about what are some clubs that we can join or some internships that we can do or where like places that we can volunteer or
Mm.
what kind of conversations can I be having with like professional or professors or mentors in the space to just like ask questions about some potential other careers after sport. So, yeah, it's definitely a lot of work. I'm not a
Mhm.
career counselor, but we can be talking about like what's important to you. How can we work this in within sport and life and be exploring other parts of you and your identity.
Well, I mean, speaking to values just kind of does that in and of itself, I'm sure, to a
Yeah.
certain extent. Like what lights you up, what are you excited about,
Mhm.
what gets you to the next step. So, okay, so you worked with college athletes. I know I mentioned the Olympic athletes. So take me through a little bit of like your professional career since leaving BYU with your doctorate. What did your professional path look like?
Yep. So, as part of as part of the PhD process, your last year you do an internship year. So I did that in Pennsylvania at Lehigh University. And then you do a postdoc, which is to say that you still have to be supervised for a certain number of hours before you can be licensed. And so I did that at the University of Nebraska and then decided to stay on as an athletic psychologist in their sports psychology program. And I was there for 3 years. While I was there, I got a contract with the Seattle Reign, so the team that I played for. Got contracted to work with them as their team psychologist and did that remotely. And then would just kind of fly in here and there. And then in my last year at Nebraska, I moved to part-time so that I could still do Seattle. And then I also got a contract with the Canadian national women's soccer team, which was like super awesome for me. Um, in doing that, that's where, so how international soccer or football works is
Yeah.
all of the athletes play either in college or for a pro team. And then every 6 weeks, they come together with their national team. during these international windows, and they compete against other countries. And so every 6 weeks we would travel for about 2 weeks to could be anywhere. I think while I was with the team, we probably went to like 8 different countries. So that's super fun. And then in 2023, we went to the Women's World Cup in Australia, and then 2024 Paris Olympics. So those were awesome experiences. And then now I'm in Salt Lake City doing private practice, like you said, and working with League One Volleyball, which is a new professional women's volleyball league in the US, and taking on private practice clients. So that could be youth in sport, that could be I have a referral for just a CEO who wants to work on his golf game on the side. So like it could really be anyone. Another thing in like performance and sports psychology is that we like coach coaches. So that we can help coaches. Yeah, I know, right? We need that. We can help.
Girl, that's like a whole nother conversation.
I know. There's a park. Okay, this is a tangent. There's a park right by my house. We walk by like with our dog and with my son,
No.
and there's baseball fields. And I just like I'm throwing the ball for my dog, and I'm listening to these youth baseball coaches, and I'm like, absolutely not. Like the exact opposite of what you need to be doing right now. I'm not going to say that, but in my mind, like that's how I feel. Or like when you go to the gym and someone's form is completely wrong, you're like, gosh, I really want
Yeah.
to, but I can't.
It's not my place. This is not my place. Just zip it, Stacy. Don't say it. Don't say anything. I'm gonna confess this. It's fine. It's fine. Wait, I had an interesting. My sons have played sports for many years. My oldest is 16. My middle's 14. So like they've been around all the different coaches, and I'm very good about like explaining to them like just because they're coaches doesn't mean they always have the best mindsets, doesn't mean they always have the best behaviors. Like it is what it is. Like we're gonna meet people where they're at. Like, but ultimately, like you're as long as you feel like you're continuing to have fun to a certain extent. Obviously, as you get older, that kind of changes a little bit. But like you want to still have fun and you want to be able to continue to develop as a player. Like we're gonna look at and as a person. Like that,
Mhm.
those are the three things that we're looking for as a family.
Nice.
And there's this one coach. Oh my gosh. After a basketball tournament for my oldest, and I am very non-confrontational. I do not like confrontation. I don't like any of that. But for whatever reason, when it comes to my kids, my mama bear can come out just a little bit. And he said something to the boys along the effects of like, it looked like they had been sitting on there, you know what, for you know how long, and then eating Cheez-Its and all this stuff, just screaming at them. And I like turned and then like it was during a timeout that he was saying it. And then it was like the game ended shortly after, and these boys are just like getting berated. They're all emotional. I think he's fourth grade at this time, probably like very young. And I, from the sideline, I think I yelled, "Attitude reflects leadership, coach." Dad was like, "Stacy," I'm like, "I'm sorry, but like I need to buy him a book or something. Like, what's wrong with you?"
Mhm.
Oh, that's good to know though. I mean, yeah, that's again a whole podcast probably. But like helping coaches coach, like that's a
Yeah,
big deal.
totally. Yep. And that's
Yeah.
fun too, because I didn't realize, okay, so within soccer, you have to get licenses to coach at different levels. But okay, I'm not trying to throw UNL football under the bus, but when I was working with them, that's when I learned that they don't need any specific training as a
Mm-mm.
coach. I'm like, cool, so you
Mm-hmm.
played at some point or like you're a student of the game, all great. But they don't have to get trained in how to help people like learn skill development, how to create a like training program and plan, and definitely not the psychology of how to coach. And I'm like, I think that we're doing especially youth a disservice by not requiring some form of training for
Well,
coaches.
I mean, to work at the Y or to coach for the Y, which is like completely a different level, but like you have to go to a place and you have to get trained on like the rules, yes, but like also like the safety and like pass
Mhm.
your background screening and like all of those
Mhm.
other things. Like it wouldn't be that hard to like throw in some kind of like psychological training or something along those lines, or at least expectations on like what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. But then you get into the private sector and the select sport. I mean, that's a whole nother
Mhm.
um, so when working with the high level females, I this just like fascinates me. US soccer, I think, is probably like one of the programs that has done the most for really getting the word out to young girls and girls sports in general in regards to like female specific physiology, female
Mhm.
specific um awareness in regards to the way your body works, your cycle, your menstrual cycle, like probably your mental health. Like they've done such a good job of like opening the door for the conversation. I know the day that we went to the current game, it happened to be female athletic performance night, which I was like, how did we nail that? That's awesome. But they
Nice.
have a doctor that they work with at KU
Mhm.
that like you mentioned like is doing like that professional alignment with them, and is talking with these athletes, and she spoke to the stadium just about like women's unique physiology and how like we need to train a little bit different and how like things look a little bit different from a performance standpoint, meaning like athleticism. But I'm sure that the mental side of that is also like a huge, I don't want to say completely unique, but there's probably some dynamics that you have to navigate a little bit differently. I know mental health for women specific is women's health in general is not as well researched, but women's mental health specific is not super well researched either. So I'm sure you're like navigating a lot in that space, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, oh man, you're testing me back to school where I'm trying to like some of the research in this. There are definitely some disorders that show up more in women than
Mm-hmm.
men. I think anecdotally, what I see is I think kind of in the stereotypical way that men are just much more guarded in being vulnerable and in emotional expression. Um, Women, although it exists in male athletes as well, I think what I see more frequently with women is probably around body image concerns. Again, that definitely exists within male sport, but I think that's probably the biggest difference I see working with women. Like the depression, the anxiety is the same, wanting to feel a sense of like belonging and wanting to like maximize your role and accept your role. All of that is the same. I think that where I might
The
see
body
it.
image concerns.
Yeah, and then as I'm speaking as well, and then I would say probably like sexual assault too.
Whew. Yeah,
Yeah,
I bet.
your warning.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's probably absolutely. When you're speaking with the body image stuff, I know something you wanted to touch on was like the nutrition component of things. And like, I think that the psychological relationship that we all have with nutrition is so unique and so individual and so deep, deep rooted to along our whole lives. But I would imagine that line of like, depression, anxiety being related to potentially low energy availability and like the ability or these women maybe potentially like not eating as well or as often as maybe they should, and that affecting their mental. I mean, it'll affect their physical performance eventually. It may not right out of the gate, but like that mental side of it, increased anxiety, like all of those things, I would imagine you see quite a bit.
Yeah, so when I was at UNL, I got the opportunity to work really closely with their sports nutrition department. And I was kind of like the liaison on
Mm,
like ordered eating team with them. And I think speaking with them and collaborating with them helped put words and statistics to what I probably experienced when I was an athlete, which is that we were all scared of carbs, we were all scared of fat, we were all scared of eating too much. And most women I would say even at the professional level, we're under fueling. And
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, no, well, I don't want to, or we have these rules of I can only eat these foods at these times of day, or like before or after a training, or on a day off, or on a game day, like just a lot of messed up rules. And so when, yeah, let's say when someone is underperforming, there can be so many components to it. And maybe like an undertrained coach might look and be like, oh, well, this person isn't performing because they don't care. They're not putting forth effort. But like maybe their sleep is terrible and maybe
Mm-hmm.
they are under fueling and not getting enough energy to be able to run 6 miles in the game. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result of that, and it just becomes a cycle. As a result of that, they're probably not making the connection to the food. So then they're just like, wow, I suck, or like I can't compete at this level. And it's like, oh, maybe there's some other stuff going on. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're all interconnected. Um, yeah, mental health, I would say it's bidirectional as well. Like mental health struggles can lead to food and exercise struggles and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, we see that in the gym. Not, I mean, with our demographic, like I would say, I'm gonna throw out a number of about 75% of our gym is probably under fueling, like, and not even necessarily intentionally. Like, it's
Totally.
not like it's a intentional thing. It's just we have been taught that to be smaller, we eat less,
Yes.
if that's what we want.
Right.
And carbs were bad for a long time. I think that's slowly starting to change, but for the demographic in perimenopause and menopause right now, like they need those carbs still, and they're the ones that aren't getting it.
Yeah.
And we're really taught that back then. And it's just, I think it's slowly shifting, but like even going to the, Casey Current game and like seeing these women athletes, it's like you have to have some type of body fat on you to perform. Like you look at the, like it is very few and far between where you see a very, very talented, high performing athlete at like 10% body fat. Like it is not a sign of fitness necessarily to like maintain that level of body fat and expect your body to perform at the highest level possible. And so I can't even imagine the conversations around all of that. And do you feel like the expectations that they have for themselves are they themselves, or is it society? Is it coaches? Like who is setting this expectation of like maybe how they should look in relation to how they should perform?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. So you
Okay.
take the, I'm gonna just make assumptions about your demographic and population, but like a general population person, maybe they are like into fitness, or maybe they just want to be healthier, be able to be more mobile or stronger, whatever it is. As women, we have the societal pressures, right? So
Hmm.
all of that messaging, boom, on them. Okay, then right back to coaches. Then they probably grew up with coaches making comments about how much food they're eating and what their
Hmm.
bodies look like. And especially in an aerobic sport where like you have to be able to have endurance,
Hmm.
coaches will equate how someone looks to their ability to, yeah, I know, right? To perform. So it's like, oh, like just little comments, right? Like, oh, blah, 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 looks bigger, or looks like they put on 10 pounds. And then that must mean that again, we don't know what's behind weight gain or weight loss, right? Coaches
Right.
reinforcing unhealthy weight loss all the time to where they're like, ooh, this is good. This is what coach wants. Um, some coaches literally making comments about their body to their face. It's better now, but like at some point in their career, it's probably, yeah, yes, you look like you want to jump in. Go ahead.
this is, I mean, I know we're talking about women specific, but like my son experiences this all the time, like
Yeah,
all the time. And
yeah,
he's 16 years old. He's six, 6'1", probably. He's not quite done, that's for sure. But I mean, the obsession with his height, like he needs to get taller, he needs to get taller, he needs to get taller, he needs to get taller. Like it's a constant conversation in our house. Or
yes,
well, he's having the conversation in our house. Um, it is his size. Like, I
Yeah.
don't even know how many times my coach is that he has been told that he needs to eat a cheeseburger, or he needs to eat
Yeah.
more, or he needs
Yeah.
to put on more size, and he needs to hit the gym more, and like all these things.
Mhm.
Just wait until he gets a little bigger. Just wait until he gets a little bigger. Like, it's just this constant like theme. And I related to it as a girl. Like, luckily I was raised in an environment where like my mom did not really address body image stuff with us, and I didn't carry that a ton. Like, I had the external, but I didn't have it from internal as well. um but my son, like, it is a constant conversation in our house of like, okay, like, strength is not size, size is
Yes.
not strength, like,
Yes.
performance is not size, performance is not strength. Like, there are so many different aspects to the way your body is made, the way you move. Like, your talent is not dependent on your ability. And then when you think you're small, you play small. Like, the way that he's strong enough that he should not get like pushed over by these other players or like those types of things. Like, I've seen it squat, like, he's plenty strong, but you're
Hmm.
coming in hot and he's going to fall over because you're bigger than him. So he's just assuming that you're
Hmm.
going to beat him. And
Yeah.
so like that in turn, like, that has been fed to him, and not by me, but by coaches in general. And I mean, we have a lot of conversations on like, you need to eat. Like, you do need to eat. Like, it is important that you eat, because the
Mhm.
amount of energy that you are expending on the daily is significant enough that you really do need to be eating consistently for hormones, for growth, for like all of those things. But it's not a to get bigger or to be able to be this version of whatever that expectation is in a coach's mind of what strength looks like or what an athlete should look like, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think I heard like the eye test from coaches, and I'm like, that's bullshit. What does that even mean? So yeah, I'm with you. Like how it
What is
looks.
that? What's an eye test?
It's just to say like, oh, I can tell whether like someone has gained or lost weight or is stronger or less strong or is like more capable at performance or not based off of what they can see and like no other data or metrics, which is just ridiculous. But yeah, my husband, he's 6'11". He played basketball and had the same thing. It was and working with the football team, right? Like it's always just like we need you to put on 20 to 30 pounds. And then they're just shoving food, like just not listening to their body at all, just shoving food down their mouth, like having like I remember when my husband and I were first dating, we would go to In and Out and he would get probably like four double doubles and I'm like, "What?" And we've been married 10 years now and it's been like a slow retraining, but he was just used to I need to finish what's on my plate or I need whatever anyone else wants if they're not done like and they give it
Eat
to
it.
me. Yes, exactly. And it's like, no, dude. Are you hungry? Yeah. Do you want it?
Well,
Anyway.
and the appetite's ebbs and flows based on, your growth, like in different stages of growth and growth spurts. And like, that's I mean, we see it in our house all the time. Like, it sucks when they're both going through it at the same time. Like, I can't keep food in the house. And then other times they eat like birds. And that's like just how it, I'm sure you see that with your toddler. Like, it's
Yes,
like
exactly.
this. Just the quantities get bigger as they get
Yeah,
bigger.
yeah,
And so I think, yes, women struggle with it. And yes, like, women are like told our narrative, and I don't want to diminish like our narrative and the things that that these high level athletes and women in our gym and all over the world are dealing with as far as like expectation versus the reality of our bodies. But I mean, these men are dealing with it too, and I think the biggest thing is they're just not talking about it as much. Like, they're
yeah,
not voicing the concern as much.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, whether you are again like a general population person or an elite athlete, there is an ideal in quotes like image that is created within whatever culture. And that's another thing, it's culture specific as well. So like in Nebraska might look different than in
Mhm.
California. Um, and for sure as an elite athlete, there's a different ideal. So even you being like, oh, 10% body fat doesn't make sense. I'm sure and have heard there are still women who are like, no, that's what I'm going for. Like less body fat
Mhm.
is better.
Well, yeah, I mean, and what was the gymnastics team that brought a lot of light to all of that too,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Mhm.
having to stay small, losing your period, like,
Mhm.
all of the ramifications of it. So, but in respect to your time, I have a couple more questions. But in regards to like things that people could take away, whether it's for their kids, for themselves, whether it's an anxious athlete or maybe somebody that's struggling with identity. Maybe let's start with like anxious. When you're dealing with somebody that has like performance anxiety,
Mhm.
whether that's in a sports setting, or we could relate this to, a board meeting, or a doctor's appointment you're not looking forward to for your kid. Like there's a lot. There's a lot
Yeah.
of anxiety that comes up with being a
Yes.
woman, right? What are some things that you recommend to people to like really just like ground themselves and like come back to themselves, and because they still have to perform, they still have to come out there and do that. How do they find their flow? How do they like center themselves?
Yes. Good question. A lot of different things. I'll try to keep these are not
Maybe like
necessarily
one or two.
yes. So first and foremost, I'm always working on like physiological regulation because anxiety at the end of the day is like our nervous system, right? And a fight or
Mhm.
flight response. And so first and foremost, can we work on some relaxation breathing and then something called progressive muscle relaxation? Because when we get anxious, our heart starts beating quicker. We're doing like really shallow chest breathing. We may get kind of like shaky, our muscles tense up. And so we want to get our body in a more relaxed state, which is then going to signal to our brain that we are safe and like we're not in
Mhm.
danger. So that's always the first thing that I work on with people. Um, if you meet with a therapist or have access to it, there's a thing called biofeedback that you can like connect and you can actually see your heart rate
Mhm.
variability and you can see how it changes based off of your breath. So you can train your breath with like a visual of like, okay, when I am in that kind of parasympathetic state, this is what it looks like and it feels like. So that's like perfect world. No, we don't all have
That's
access.
cool. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Um, and then I would say that, man, where do I want to go next? Let's say, I think a big piece of when we feel anxious is that we're paying attention to the wrong things.
Mm.
So let's say I'm giving a presentation, right? I guess some people might do
Mhm.
that in front of a crowd. I'm thinking about in a less effective way. I might be thinking about what other people are thinking about me. I might be thinking about looking dumb or incompetent or unintelligent. I may be thinking about like forgetting my lines or stuttering, or I might be thinking about the stakes of this
Mm.
presentation. Oh, I need to in order to do this. All of that is going to make me feel anxious, not actually help me to perform. And so it's about coming back to the task and doing my attention being on whatever like I would call it like attentional cues are most important. So whether that if again, if it's a presentation, then I know for me when I get anxious, I get sped up. And so I'm telling myself like slow down and make sure that my cadence is whatever is ideal and optimal for me. Another thing that helps decrease anxiety is preparation. So just putting in the time before to feel prepared for whatever it is you're going to do is going to make you feel a lot more confident going into that thing.
Yeah.
And then the last one I would say is to focus on the controllables, right? All of that stuff I was talking about in terms of our attention and what we might be thinking about, stuff I can't control, what can I control? Um, right, my breath, my preparation. We shrink it down to like little tasks and performance-based things rather than the outside factors and
Mhm.
so sure, like in a let's say in a squat. I'm going to get this wrong, so you correct me. But I might be cute, like you, right? You might give me cues, right? Or someone else
Mhm.
cues, and like maybe that's like driving through your heels, or like your posture, or like where the bar is on my back, like things like that that are going to cue me into the actual task of what I need to do and help me to perform
Mhm.
rather than the external factors.
Mhm. So focusing on the movement or the performance or like the product that you're delivering, not the
Yeah,
external.
exactly. Something task focused, whatever that task may be that you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay, last question. Motivators. I feel
Hmm.
like from like athletes in general, there's, I think number one, do you have to be an extremely competitive person to be a high level athlete?
Mm,
And then two, like I think there's a lot of conversation around like anger being a motivator, like
mm,
being competitive being a motivator, harnessing your anger to like motivate you, harnessing a different emotion to like
mm.
help your performance or to like increase your performance. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that. Like, I guess that's kind of two questions, but kind of one.
Okay, got you. So I got the emotion part. Remind me what that first part was again.
Competitive. Like,
Oh, yes.
is that a real like as far as like a good motivator? And is it present in these high level athletes, or is there a way to be a high level athlete and not really be attached to that competitive side?
Right. So I would say that whether it's competitiveness or whatever emotion you're trying to harness to perform, that it's pretty individualized. So I can't say like yes or no. I'd say like
Mm-hmm.
depends on the person, and I'm going to say, okay, when we're doing that thing, what is the product? What's the outcome? And how do you feel? And if it's effective, cool, let's roll with it. We might refine it. If it's not effective, let's try something else. So but I'll speak generally. With competitiveness, does someone need to be competitive to be a high level athlete? No. So a I would say competitiveness in the form of I like to win and I like to be better than people. That is a form of motivation, and I would call that a more like extrinsic motivator, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can also be great, and in general, we if that's all that you have, then that's actually going to be problematic. So we need to also have intrinsic motivators of I do this because I love it. I do this because I want to like achieve and progress and grow, and like master something. I want to do this. Maybe it's something that's like bigger than the sport and you. You talked about in your household, how's this going to make me a better person?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that you don't need the competitiveness. I think that it helps, like for some people, but I would say that you cannot just have the competitiveness. There also needs to be other pieces for you to have like a long-standing, sustainable career.
Mm-hmm.
On the emotional side, this is where I think it gets really interesting. All of us can probably I think of like Kobe probably when I think of this.
Mm-hmm.
People who like play angry. My husband is like, I play best when I'm angry. And
Mm-hmm.
like interesting, I play best when I'm having fun. Like I'm just having and so when we play against each other, I'm like, la la la, this is so fun. He's like, why are you so
It was so great.
Yeah, exactly. That's an exaggeration, but like kind of like that. And
Yes.
funny anecdote. So, England Rugby on their socials released this video of like this core exercise where one of the athletes was in like a bear crawl position, like a bear hold, and their
Mm-hmm.
other teammate was sitting on their back and then like going like side to side. So they had to like stabilize their core. And I was like, ooh, that sounds fun. Let's try it. So I did it with my husband on my back and I did it. And I was like, cool, that was nice. He's like, okay, my turn. And then I went on his back and he went to do it and he couldn't do it the first time. And his ego was so hurt in that moment. And then, then he was like, okay, let's try again, maybe 10 minutes later. And he did it, which I knew that he could. And he's like, I had to like get into my hate fire in order to do that. And I was like, okay, so it works for him, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
in general, I like to help people come from I there's no positive and negative emotions, but for the sake of like colloquialism, like I like to come from more of a place of positive emotion than negative emotion. So, how I might, if I were working with my husband on this, I would say, okay, when you are angry, how do you play? And what you'll probably hear is that you hear someone who's more aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
who is willing to like be more decisive in their decision making, who's willing to like control the tempo of the game. And you can do that without being angry. So it's like, okay, here's the emotion, right? What are the actions that come with that emotion? And can we do that at any point? We do the same thing with confidence. They're like, I need to feel confident in order to perform. No, you don't. Like, does it help? Yes. But okay, what does it look like when you play confident? We can do that when you're feeling nervous. You can do that when you're feeling sick. You can do that when you're feeling happy. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I get into the what do you feel like that emotion gives you? Can we do those things without that emotion? And I might be asking, like, okay, what's the drawback or at what cost?
Mm.
And if there's not a drawback and there's not a cost, okay, cool. Keep playing angry. That's fine. But if there is, where you're like, oh, like I hate, like I come away like hating myself or like hating playing, then I'm like, okay, cool. Let's get the same outcome through a different pathway.
I love that.
Did
Okay,
that
I
all
have
make
one more question. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Okay, one more. The when a team energy shifts, you're
Mm,
watching a team, you see them performing, and all of a sudden you can just see the spiral. Like all
mhm,
everything's going wrong all at the
mhm,
same time, and like
mhm,
momentum, I guess, is what
mhm.
they'll probably say on
Yep.
TV. Like the momentum's with this team or with that team. Like how often are you pulled into that timeout when that
Mhm,
timeout comes? Or like
mhm.
like what are you doing as a collective group to like shift that and get that momentum to shift.
Yeah, well, I think that it needs to be trained. So I think ideally my intervention isn't in like the match or the
Mm-hmm.
competition. It's in training. And so then when it happens in a match, everyone's like, oh, we already know what
Mm-hmm.
happens when we notice this. So how I might train it is first with awareness. So what are we noticing or what does it feel like when it starts to shift? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that happens, we need to designate either we designate someone or like we just say whoever sees it calls it out so that we can do some kind of reset, right? So if you're in a sport that naturally has breaks or timeouts, then that would be the time to use it. Or if you're in a sport like soccer, then you do your tactical injury so that you can come over. And then usually what needs to happen again is like we need to down regulate because we're probably like over aroused. So can we
Mm-hmm.
go down? Can we make sure that we have calm energy within the, let's say, huddle, right? Because it's easy for people to be like pointing fingers and like, what's going on, and blah, blah, blah. And everyone's throwing ideas out. So we need to have calm energy. We need to have calm energy from the coach. And most of the time, what we need is like 1 to 3, we keep it simple, 1 to 3 key behaviors that we want to focus on in this. So if it is soccer, ideally the coaches have been watching it and can assess and can be like, okay, this is the adjustment. Um, we're probably going to be focusing on communication because when things get hard, our communication gets bad. And then we're, yeah, probably picking one other either tactical or just like
Mm-hmm.
energy building action. Like in soccer, it might be like, we're just going to win all our 50-50 tackles and we're just going to go in hard, right? Or in basketball, it might be like, we're going to win the rebound battle.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that like when they happen, they're energizing and then it starts to shift and it's things that feel controllable. So probably something tactical, behavioral, and then communication based, I think, to try to shift it back.
Do you ever ask them or like have them ask, like, what's everybody thinking right now? Are y'all thinking crap about yourselves? Because
It
y'all are
depends. I think it depends on how much time you have in the break. So if you have time to source from the athletes what they're experiencing, yes, go for it. If it needs to be quick, then I think it's just like give them the info so
yeah.
that their mind is probably right, especially if you're playing a sport that's a little bit more dynamic and like flowy. They're probably just
Mm,
getting a lot of information and input, and it might be overload. So we need to keep it really simple so that that's not like, oh my gosh, I need to fix this and this and this and this and this, and like my
right.
thinking and how I'm playing and my body shape and blah, blah,
Mm.
blah. It's just like someone else just tell me what to do.
I just gotta go get the rebound.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
it.
We
Yep.
simplify it and then we're not overwhelmed. And when we're overwhelmed, we feel anxious. So it's like simplify controllables.
I love that. Well, Maria, this has been absolutely enlightening. I'm not lying. I really want you to come back and do a coach one because I think that's just like and coaching girls versus boys and like
Mhm.
it's just I think sure there's so many different layers, but you are an absolute wealth of knowledge, a joy and gem of a human. So I truly appreciate you taking this time to talk with us and share your knowledge and whether they are athletes or have athletes or are just the weekend warriors or the gym members just trying to make themselves better. They have some very good, amazing tangibles and awareness to take away. So thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you, Stacy.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Well, we will chat soon, I'm sure.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, just text me your email.